Okay, this is the October 2nd, 2019 meeting of SIG Auth. We are now being recorded. So I'll pull up the agenda. All right, can everybody see that agenda? Mo, talk real quick.
I'm here.
All right, good. I just wanted to make sure I could hear everybody.
Okay. Yeah, we're here. Sorry.
All right. So the first item on the agenda is OIDC issuer URL. I think Charles wrote this down, started this up. This actually was spun out of a change to the community repo before we migrated the token request stuff to a KEP. Essentially, it proposes adding a Jukes URL and also an OIDC discovery document to the API server to make discovering the keys and the issuer of the service account token issuer easier for in-cluster clients. I wanted to make sure that everybody got around to reviewing this and was wondering if there are any thoughts or suggestions so that we can maybe mark this as implementable as alpha.
I have not reviewed it or looked at it. I do have a question though. Is this compatible with what Amazon has done with their, what is it, like a service account workload identity that is somehow related to the identity of a workload on Amazon? They have directions for overriding things like the service account key and issuer and audience, as I recall, in one of their help docs.
Yes. So I think that this shouldn't conflict with anything that Amazon is doing. The main issue that this is trying to solve is discovery of the set of keys used by the issuer and the set of and the actual issuer URL. Those are the two things missing from that are difficult to discover without pre-configuration.
I can see that Micah Hausler, he's the Amazon guy, right? So
yeah.
he hasn't come in and said this won't work. That's good enough for my question.
Yeah, so this doesn't preclude maybe Amazon from hosting or using an issuer URL that is not directed at the Kubernetes master. So you could still host one on foo.aws.com/well-known OpenID configuration. That should still be possible. I think this is like the easy way out. If you have a connection to the master, you know where it is, you can discover that information.
Yeah, I think, David, to your question, if I remember the history correctly, this came out as a desire to sort of meet people where they were, people being Amazon and various other providers, that you can tell them, all right, here's an issuer URL. Anything from the well-known is trusted to do whatever, or at least trusted in the sense of you can verify it. And this is a desire to make a Kube API server basically compatible with that flow.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't doubt it. Since I hadn't read it, I was hoping for a brief, yes, David, this works with them. That sounds like what I got. Sounds good.
Yeah, I don't think AWS will move their issuer URL off of a hosted API, even with this the existence of this API. But if you have maybe an AWS client that needs to know what that issuer URL is, running inside a cluster will have an easier time to discover that information if we made this available from the Kubernetes API. Cool. Well, now that it has been announced, I'll let it sit for a week or two and check back in next week, and hopefully we can make progress in 1.17.
Mike, is other than obviously funneling all the information out of like the token authenticator and the stuff that's fed into the Kube API server, there's nothing technically missing, right? Because we got the key IDs now. There's like nothing else.
Missing from what?
Anything that prevents us from emitting all the information we need from this endpoint.
Nope. I think this is the last bit. The jukes and the issuer URL are the two pieces missing.
Cool. Thanks.
All right. David, do you want to introduce this one?
Sure. So one interesting case that we had on a self-hosted cluster. So OpenShift is self-hosted and kubeadm is self-hosted. And when you get to a point where you have to refresh your serving certs for kubelets, if you have a failure and for some reason they do not get updated, and you go to try to debug the logs for your kube controller manager, which is running on a kubelet, the Kube API server will report that it cannot trust the kubelet that it is connecting to. And there is no way today for a client to say, you know what, it's okay. I understand that it will be possible for an evil kubelet, if one somehow manages to grab the endpoint you're connecting to give me back false log data, but I really want to see what this log data is. And this is a proposal to add an option where a client can opt in and say, go ahead and allow this insecure proxy mode. Now, the Kube API server still authenticates to the kubelet. So kubelets, if they're configured to check, is it a real Kube API server, will say either yes or no based on what the Kube API server sends. There are some details about this that are worth explaining. It means one of the key pieces is that a kubelet cannot replay the Kube API server's credentials, or an evil kubelet rather, right? We use an MTLS connection, so it can proxy you somewhere, but it cannot choose the URL that you proxy to, right? So you're always going to be proxying to a particular set of container logs. And if you were to intercept and try to rewrite, you would be terminating it, so you would no longer have those credentials. This is just proposing adding that option and has a way to plummet through into our Kube API server and into kube control. Although the kube control is gravy, the key piece is the Kube API server bits.
What about a TCP proxy?
I was hoping to not try to rewrite the path for, a TCP proxy, you mean evil kubelet creates a TCP proxy?
Right.
It would allow you to redirect it to a different IP, but I don't believe that it would allow you to rewrite the content of the request, because that gets terminated at the final endpoint, right?
Yeah. What does that path look like right now?
Jordan actually has a comment in there. It looks like node IP, node port, some set of stuff, pod name, container logs, container name. It's pretty specific. He does point out that if someone has cluster admin rights and can modify the node object directly, you can redirect it with a particular pod and namespace. Again, if you can create a pod in this other namespace, and that if someone has a deployment topology where they have shared the credentials for a Kube API server across 2 different clusters, and you have rights to write into any namespace, then you could target, and you had network connectivity, you would be able to, and you had an evil kubelet powers, you would then be able to control where the Kube API server sent its credentials. It's a pretty significant series of ands. The person doing this is already high powered. I think he even noted it. Yeah, he even noted it the next comment down. Like, you already have the power to send these credentials somewhere else. So as he here, maybe he can speak to how he perceives the risk. I don't see this as high risk. I'm happy to explain the series of ands, but it is.
I think that we are certainly saved by this pod namespace. I'm just considering that the upgrade aware proxy still uses the API server user's authority. It does scare me for bugs that might pop up, and we had that confused deputy problem with the API server earlier this year. I don't think that there is a problem with allowing users to pick their own level of security for something like get logs, and I see this as probably a useful feature during an incident. I just want to be really convinced that we're not compromising the security of other users that don't choose to use this feature. I'm basically convinced that this is probably not a problem, but it is kind of a hairy area of our code base.
It's certainly worth being extremely explicit about.
Yeah.
I agree, and I didn't try to sidestep it. Right, it's written down. I called it out explicitly. I added more detail because Stefan was also concerned about it, and he wanted people to be sure that I was right about a TCP proxy is not able to rewrite the request. I obviously think I'm right. And then there was the notion of what if a kubelet attempts to try to redirect, right? Evil kubelet redirects, but that's already been stopped in our code because we had a bug there once before. And I linked that in there in the KEP for you, since you had also asked about
it. David, a question on this. Is the class of sort of TLS errors that you're trying to bypass with the insecure flag, is there any other class other than it's just expired?
Expired is the only one that I know of at this instant that I want to bypass. It's the specific one that bit me when we chose to add this power to kube control and to our aggregated API servers, as a for instance. We didn't try to subdivide it based on like the name matches and the thing is expired. It may be possible to do that. And I'm pretty sure I can try to negotiate the TLS myself. If I would prefer not to write the code at that level, because if you find yourself writing code at that level, you usually have made a mistake somewhere in planning. But if SIG feels strongly, I would be willing to try to write it at that level of granularity. I think that's where you get into like controlling the dial.
Yeah, I'm not saying that's a good idea. I was more thinking of the insecure skip TLS verify is like the big hammer of just turn off TLS, please.
It's not entirely turn off TLS, right? It means that you can't confirm the identity of the thing that you're speaking to, but you are still confidential, right?
Yeah, you have encryption but no authentication.
Right, and so yeah, I don't want to characterize it as you've turned it off. You have not verified the person sending you the data back.
No.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Mo. Definitely something to explore, whether we can relax just the expiration check. And if it turns out to be too hairy, then it might not be
Yeah,
worth
if
it.
I recall correctly, the only thing exposed is the big turn off authentication knob, not the reason why authentication failed knob.
Right. So TLS config, the native Golang pieces that are easy to use, only have the skip TLS verify. If Mike, are you saying that you want to see what trying to override
Yeah, is it
dial
absolutely
looks like?
well? Is it absolutely terrible? And if it is, then maybe we can just turn it all off. But if all we want to
Okay.
do is turn off the expiration validation, don't we do some custom stuff in the X509 authenticator? Or do we
The
still
verify options, I'm pretty sure we build the verify options and then run it how you would expect, right? You build verify options, run the standard verify after the fact. I will have a look. I am certainly willing to explore the option.
Yeah.
But were I you, I would not get my hopes up that it was practical.
Okay.
I feel like I remember writing this code once before in a dial function and thinking to myself, I really hope I got that right.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, like, so this feature didn't exist. So what did you actually do? Like, what was the, maybe you said this already, but what was the workaround that this feature replaces? Like, how bad was the workaround?
It was pretty bad. So you had to go through and create a bastion with a different set of credentials, which in this case didn't exist. Go through and get the people who were experiencing the problem to agree that it was a safe thing to do to create the bastion, to then give that SSH access into the individual master nodes, connect to the master nodes to then look at the data that was there, only to realize that, wow, that process took you 3 days. And the interesting information that would have told you what had failed was gone 2 days ago. It is not that no workaround exists, it's that the workarounds are extremely heavy.
So you couldn't just SSH to the nodes, for example?
No, because the nodes were all cut off, right? You can't do an exec because of the same reason, right? And you have private cluster.
Yeah, I don't think I have any disagreement from David that if you're self-hosted and this fails, your life is very, very bad. And you don't know how to fix your life because you can't get the information that tells you how to do it. So, yeah.
Yeah. In general, I don't think this is a problem as long as it doesn't hurt users that are not using this feature. And I would think that we should explore relaxing this as little as possible for this specific scenario where certificate rotation is failing. But other than that, I don't have any.
Okay, I will drill into that this week. I would like to see this enhancement get approved before the enhancements freeze.
When is that?
October 15th, almost 2 weeks from now. I think it's a reasonable time frame.
Yeah, sounds good.
So David, you want this in 117? Does this have a stability level, or is it just a flag that gets added somewhere?
It has a stability level. I listed it down below. I would introduce it as beta. I want to make sure that it works as expected, and more importantly, people can turn it off should it not work as expected for at least one release before trying to turn it on as GA.
Will it be possible after it is GA to turn this off at the API server level?
We have not generally done that. I am willing to take feedback there, but I would say that for the most part, our feature gates have been turn on alpha features, turn off beta features, exist for a release or so after it goes GA, and then they're removed.
Right. So I think that I'll say it again, even though I said it 5 times before, as long as we can ensure that a user using this feature or not using this feature does not have lower security because of its existence. I think that it's fine to turn on everywhere. But if like
I certainly agree. I'd like to ship as beta so that it can be turned off in case something unexpected happens. It's not a statement that I think something unexpected is going to happen. It is, if I happen to write a bug for the first time in my life, there is a way to recover that. And I figured this group would be happy with, or would be pleased to see that as an option.
Yeah, sounds good. Cool. Well, I'll look forward to hearing back about the custom TLS verification that you end up looking into.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, Dave.
Yep.
Next item. I think this is you, Mo.
Yeah, and I don't think Jordan is on the call, which is unfortunate because he seems to be the strong voice in the other direction. And it's kind of unfair to have a discussion without him. So the history is, after the security audit was done, one of the things they had pointed out is, hey, the input configuration format for ABAC is very different from our other configs, and it uses a less than common approach. Certainly we could try to fix ABAC. One of the things that Mike, you had mentioned from that was, can we just deprecate ABAC? And I'd sent out an email to the mailing list asking for people's opinions. That set of people certainly was like, yeah, it's fine. Our back is better, and we can use webhooks to do anything else. I think Jordan has a concern, I think, for just removing it in general, but I think his primary concern was that ABAC is a built-in mechanism for configuring access that cannot be modified through the Kube API. It's just a file passed to the Kube API server, and there's no way once the cluster is running to mess with it other than changing the file and restarting the Kube API server. Mm-hmm. I am not sure that I worry about those distinctions existing. You can always create a cluster role binding today if RBAC is enabled to grant system colon authenticated and non-authenticated any permission you want, and effectively bypass all authorization across all users. I do suspect that most clusters use RBAC, even if they use a webhook for more fancy authentication and authorization schemes. So I don't know, Mike, what your feelings are, if you think we should, obviously it's weird that we have a beta feature that we basically have no plan to GA, but we probably should if we don't want to ever remove it.
I see the point. I mean, it's a similar scenario when we have the dynamic audit policy. We're not going to remove the static audit policy. I can see the argument that this has utility. I guess my question would be, is anybody still using it after this long? That's a hard question to answer.
Yeah, there's that, and I can kind of see a stronger argument for saying that I want a auditing system that effectively can't be turned off in the normal means, because I always want like baseline metadata audit logs coming out of the system, and I use the dynamic audit to sort of pinpoint more specific failures I'm trying to investigate. I don't necessarily see anyone really doing that with ABAC, right? I don't, you're going to assign static permissions to all your users and just turn off RBAC and any webhook and say that that's how your permissions are done. I guess, that might work. I don't know how scalable or maintainable that is as an approach versus just having RBAC.
So Mo, a little bit more imagination. You can imagine yourself as maybe a cloud provider. And for some reason, you want to have a way for a certain identity to always have access. And so you aren't dynamically changing it, but it is a configuration flag on your kubeAPI server that you can set that a user cannot remove. They can add someone else, but they can't remove you. I'm not going to claim whether I think that is a good idea or a bad idea, but that seems like a more plausible use case. I would also remove this anyway, but it seems more plausible.
Yeah, that's a fair point. It's not a bad use case. I don't think people probably use ABAC to do that.
I hope they don't, but I couldn't guarantee one way or the other.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe we should ask around. GK definitely is no longer using it.
So no, there's your answer.
Yeah.
Yeah, nobody knows, right? Like that's the thing. Right? Nobody in the mailing list said, "Hey, please don't remove ABAC." No one has shown up to this deprecation notice saying, "Please don't remove ABAC." But we don't know because obviously we're not going to necessarily reach the people who care.
I think the static unchanging config would be a stronger argument if this was denying requests. If I could say, like, no matter what RBAC rules you set, you can never access this resource. But
yeah, I was going to say that as well. If this supported deny, it would be more useful. So I guess the TOS Trail of Sorrow. What is the name of that company?
Trail of Bits. It's a great name. I really like that name.
Trail of Bits. The recommendation was that the config file was not of a standard format. So, I mean, we could fix that. We could, and then add deny, or we can deprecate and remove this. How do we decide between those? Between taking this to GA and deprecating it? What's our decision criteria?
I mean, I think you would have to have like an actual body of users that rely and want this functionality, right, over RBAC or a webhook to justify the investment. And I look at the work that we want to do for GAing, like token requests and all the other investments that the SIG wants to make, and I would probably and the KEP David just made for the TLS verification skipping. I see all of those as like value adds and improvements to the status quo.
Right. Yeah, we are not the most decisive crew sometimes. Maybe we can talk around.
It's interesting because, like, I'd say Jordan's argument is, what's the cost of continuing to maintain it? And we do have it shouldn't really just sit in beta forever, but if it don't broke and it's going to cost us time and effort to go remove this, balancing that against the time to just bring it to GA as it is and say it's GA, should be weighed, because it does offer capabilities. I kind of agree though with we're not very good at understanding what our user base is using, and it's very hard to gather that data. Like, I'm not aware of a large set of people using ABAC, but I can absolutely buy Jordan's argument that if you're in a small, compact environment, ABAC is like the simplest, sanest thing to use. And you probably look at RBAC with evil, but also I have I'm not sure that that's a good enough reason to keep it around either.
It has not been high cost, and the finding was not very severe, or in some people's opinion, potentially not a finding at all. So, yeah, have we had a significant change or bug fix in ABAC in the last 3 years?
Some of the versioning was ugly as we were refactoring various bits of config and on disk stuff. Like, I know there have been a couple points where we've been trying to clean it up. It has a small cost and future stuff along those lines with config.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, we probably won't make a decision here. Let's do a last round of discussion on this offline. Does that sound good, Mo? And
Can we post on the dev list maybe and just ask?
Yeah, I was like, we need to probably ask more than SIG Auth people because
Yeah, like
they don't care.
I've run across like Stack Overflow questions and stuff where people are like kind of pretty confused about sort of how ABAC and RBAC works, and they upgraded clusters and they don't really want to use RBAC. They just want to keep doing what they were doing, and so they're still using ABAC, but they probably shouldn't be. And so I don't know. I think there's probably a bunch of people like that we might flush out if we sent an announcement soliciting feedback from the dev list. That we probably need to write some like documentation to help some of those use cases, I would imagine. Yeah.
Yeah, broader audience next time, Mo.
Yeah, I can take the action item to go ahead and send that same email thread to the main mailing list and see if we get any more feedback. We have, since we have the documentation update and the actual PR open to Deprecate, I think that is probably easier to let people know now.
Maybe you can even send that out to announce. I don't know if that's worthy of announce. Probably not. Yeah, all right, sounds good. Send deprecation email to Kubernetes dev. See if we get any more responses. If it's crickets again, then it might be the right thing to deprecate it. Otherwise, it doesn't seem like it doesn't seem too costly to bring to GA. All right. Next item on the list, Deis Labs secret store CSI driver to Kubernetes SIGs. This would be adopted by the SIG Auth. There was a mailing list discussion. Repo is Apache 2. We had a discussion about this in the SIG meeting a little while ago. Seems like an interesting project and it could be useful. I think Tim had some comments about adoption criteria related to project health and what the ask is for from SIG Auth to maintain this and do bug fixes and to do security patches. Other than that, I think it fits with what we're trying to do. Rita, did you have any other comments on that?
Hey, yeah, thanks. So yeah, as you can see, I've opened an issue for this. I really appreciate the feedback so far, and I think the next thing I would like to do is in that list of to-dos to get a group consensus on migrating this so we can link the approval. So some of the things that I would like to get feedback on is if you scroll up the list of, owners. Right now, these are folks that are contributing to the project, but I'm wondering if, if the SIG Auth owners will want to be part of this as well. And obviously any other questions that I can answer right now.
I may have missed, who in SIG Auth and the current leads is sponsoring this?
I started an email thread to the SIG Auth mailing list.
I saw the request to the list. Maybe I didn't see a response from Mike or Mo or Tim or Jordan or me.
Yeah, I think the only person that responded was Maya.
Yes, we had a pretty thorough discussion that you might have missed in a SIG Auth meeting, David.
I did, thanks.
So I don't think that we have sponsored it yet, but I don't think, I'm definitely not opposed to this becoming a SIG project. I think Tim had a couple last comments about what the responsibility of our SIG is, but it does seem like a useful project that needs a good home.
Can I ask why that previous SIG meeting thought that Deus Labs wasn't a good home for it? I mean, they built it.
So Rita, do you want to talk on that?
I think one of the issue is that it's, Deus Labs is not a CNCF thing. I'm not really sure, but the other thing is also just discovery to make sure people can find the project.
Well, I mean, that's a really good way to get name recognition from Cube, but I mean, I don't see why we wouldn't trust Deus to continue doing the right thing. This was built using the extension mechanisms that were designed to be used to build these extensions out of tree. I'm a little surprised to see it collapse back in, but I mean, maybe if you can find me the recording, I can listen to the old recording and I'll hear the answers to these questions.
So what is your definition of out of tree in that sentence?
Well, I don't see a need. If the project is built and it's working fine, I don't see a need to move it to Kubernetes SIGs. I'm looking at it saying there's plenty of useful CSI drivers and useful extension features and admission webhooks and other pieces that we wouldn't bring in. I'm not clear on what makes this one important to add as a sub-project.
Yeah, I think that if it gains critical mass for people writing integrations with it, so it is not a it has a plugin mechanism such that it can be plugged into Vault or Azure Secret Store. If AWS wants to write one and GCP wants to write one that integrates, I think that there's value in having a neutral place to write code with shared ownership. That's what I think a Kubernetes SIG Auth project would be good for that. We already have 2 integrations, I believe. I think there's an Azure one and a Vault one. The integrations live separate from the plugin system. So Vault owns their own integration. So there is some need to make sure that the interface that this plugin exposes to integrators is consistent and driven through, that API is driven through a community process. So I think there is value.
I guess implicit in that, you're saying you don't trust that Deus would do that.
No, I didn't say that.
Okay, so in that case, like if we trust Deus to do that, why would we move it?
Why did we move Kubernetes to CNCF?
Because we didn't trust Google.
All right, so I think there's value in shared ownership. I think that the best way to achieve shared ownership is through a SIG repo. If we have multiple different organizations that want to write integrations using this, I think it would be a good spot for it.
So I want to ask a bit more of a meta question. What does it exactly mean to have a SIG project that's owned? Like for example, if there's a serious bug, is it expected that someone from the SIG should, as for example, if there was a serious bug in the auth stack inside of Core Cube, I am sure someone in the SIG would go fix it.
I think that is basically the question that Tim had been asking about what the responsibility of the SIG is once this becomes a project. Tim, do you want to speak on that?
I don't know that I exactly have more to add on that. There is sort of an open question around, as we work towards launching the bug bounty, what SIG projects and things outside of core Kubernetes, but within the org, are in scope for that. So there's sort of a question around security response, but then, yeah, also on SIG Auth as well.
Yeah, so we can clarify that. Who would be the best person to ask about that? Or is there existing documentation on what sub repos are for?
I think we just need to kind of sit down and think through it. And we being the non-existent security process working group that I'm still hoping to get off the ground for the security specific piece. For the rest of the SIG auth responsibilities, I don't know, maybe look at some SIG projects that are sponsored by other Kubernetes SIGs and see what their ownership model looks like.
Okay. Yeah, so how do we make progress on this? We've kind of been dragging our feet.
I'd be interested in seeing I'm trying to remember this mailing list thread. I think I remember a mailing list thread and like a PM responded, but not anyone from the SIG. I think I'd like to see a response, like Mike, if you think this should go in, if you could write a response on the mailing list thread and we can talk it out there, what it would mean to bring it in. Sort of the conversation we're having here, why it's better to bring it in than let it live where it is. It's not immediately obvious to me, and I might be able to see it better when you write it up.
So I will I guess list pros and cons of inclusion, share findings with the list.
Rita, I had a question for you in relation to this.
Yeah, sure.
What is your sort of desired outcome from it becoming like a SIG project? Like, what do you think gets better from your perspective?
Like moving it in, right?
Yeah, like if it's not part of DS Labs anymore, it is in Kubernetes SIGs. What do you think actually gets better from community perspective, your own perspective?
I think it definitely helps with the community discussion and contribution, because I think one of the issues that came up was, I think the Hashi Core Vault provider needed to be pulled out. That was one thing. But the second thing was it being in DS Labs, it makes it hard for people outside of Microsoft to contribute to. I think that was one of the feedback.
Yeah, I think we'd like to understand that, because I will say that at a high level, I look at this and it looks like an attempt to trade on our name. And I'm not clear on why that's a good thing for the SIG. I can see it being a very good thing for the project. It's not clear to me why it's good for the SIG.
So Jeff from the Vault team is on the call. I think he's probably a good person to discuss this.
I think it'll come up on the thread when Mike starts responding.
So what is the what was the question? I sort of zoned out there for a sec.
So I think I can answer it. David, I would agree with you if it turns out that there are just a few number of integrators who want to use the API that the secret volume supports. But if it turns out that multiple cloud providers decide to use this as to integrate with secret stores, I think there is value. And that at that point, it's good for both the project and the community. I think there's like a question of critical mass and figuring out whether a lot of people or a lot of cloud providers would like to use this as their API for integration.
Yeah. And there's only 4 committers to this project ever with more than 1 commit, right? Only 2 outside of single digits. Like,
they're all good points.
Yeah.
Let's table this for now. We'll do pros and cons on the mailing list. I'll follow up on this probably later today or tomorrow. All right, thank you. So it looks like we are done with the main agenda. Does anybody else have anything to discuss?
Hi, this is Himanshu from Pivotal. I have one issue that I would like to discuss. It's not in the agenda or the doc, but I can ping the link here.
Sure.
So I just pinged in the chat. It's a pretty old issue, and I just want to know what everybody thinks about this. Like if we should work on this or not. I know Jordan is not in favor of doing it, as he thinks there are other ways to achieve this issue.
Okay. I don't think that we should have a cluster secret. I think potentially there might be use for a cluster config map.
I also share a lot of Jordan's concerns with this, just to speak up, which was, I think, all of the things that we're saying basically is this makes the problem we have around secrets worse rather than better. And secrets are a problem for a whole host of uncluster security escalation issues. So that's why I think Jordan has a couple of perspectives. I think the one that I'm most concerned of with this is the cluster secrets would implicitly be powerful and valid, and so that it makes even more potentially powerful cross-cluster secrets available, which feels like the wrong pattern. We should make a pattern that makes it easy for only the consumers you want to get access to this secret, which would be valuable for regular secrets as well.
Right. Basically, the secret reference right now on many objects is a namespace reference, and that is the authorization model for accessing secrets. We don't have an authorization model for any cross namespace secret reference or most other references for that matter. It would be hard to, it would be a significant change to invent something for this. If we wanted to create a cluster level secret that everybody could reference, is it really a secret at that point? Secrets are handled differently than config. As far as encryption and for a while, as far as how the kubelet is authorized, or still how the kubelet is authorized to pull them and cache them, so that they're not just semantically different. They're not just named different. They actually have different handling within the system. I think those are my main concerns.
So I had a question from the peanut gallery. How would you propose solving the issue with needing to pull containers from a private registry at a cluster-wide level then?
Mm-hmm.
You mean other than the usage today where you can place them in a node keyring and specific nodes or different subsets of nodes that you could choose based on the scheduling namespace labels for nodes would then just have them there. So you could then subdivide based on namespace and never expose the credentials to the cluster.
So would that would require you to have access to the node configuration, or I'm not familiar with that pattern.
Yeah, it would.
So we're trying to create a product on top of Kubernetes where we wouldn't have access to the creation of the cluster itself, like if it was in GKE or EKS or something, but we would need to be able to pull containers from private registries for that cluster.
Can you name a specific registry that you would pull from, or is that irrelevant? But like,
yeah, I mean, for the purposes of this use case, it would be irrelevant because it could be any private registry that the customer would want to use.
So I will say, like, this is a separable problem in the sense of the kubelet infrastructure with regards to pull secrets is somewhat inflexible no matter what. There have been a number of discussions historically in this SIG on, like Mike's got the one from last year, 68810. This is something I think I care very deeply about, but it's a harder problem, which is you want to connect pull secrets to workloads without necessarily having to copy a secret into a namespace, so to keep it hidden from the consumer, for either for ease of use or for pure consumption. We have discussed a number of approaches for it. I think as we're starting to grow the flexibility of CSI local volume mounts, there's some arguments maybe that this is also something that could be managed, but it would require kubelet changes as well. It's not enough for us to just go do cluster secrets, and I don't think that has like cluster secrets wouldn't help because we still have to go do the kubelet changes and sort through it. I think there's a lot of interest in it, but it's probably separable from the wildcard cert one because it has so much more extra work.
the wildcard cert is a second use case for this. Okay.
Yeah, because like adding image pull secrets is even more complex than cluster secrets. So this is really cluster secret for pulls, which is maybe distinct from cluster secret for. And honestly, like if we were to scope this down, for instance, to pull secrets only, that might be something we could consider, for instance. Like cluster secrets is a little too broad. And so either we could break this into two smaller problems or just have one big problem or one larger design, which would take a lot longer and involve a lot more feedback as well.
Yeah. So I think the answer is that this probably needs a fair amount of work. It definitely will need a cap no matter what. And it is, in my opinion, it needs a fair amount of work before we can even start to think about implementing something like this.
Okay, thank you.
So, yeah, so for the image pull use case, please take a look at 68810 and see if this would be something that you would benefit from.
Yeah, okay, sure.
And this is Clayton. I mean, like, I think this is something that we've also wanted to see happen for a long time in 68810. And I think there's an appetite for this. It's just that we have to be somewhat cautious about it. We've never really been able to get critical mass of brains plus use case plus scoped down enough that it didn't feel risky. And so that's one of the challenges with this kind of work.
Regarding the earlier use case, just for our benefit, do you have any further documentation on what you were talking about with if you do have access to cluster setup to provide that secret?
Yeah, it's like a kubelet keyring. Wow, we made that pre 1.0. Should be docked. I think I wrote docs for it when I did. It is a keyring in the, I want to say, home directory for the kubelet at home docker config JSON that gets merged in by the kubelet, and those credentials are used in addition to the ones used by, or the ones in the service account image pull secrets for a given pod.
Yeah. Is that documented anywhere on Kubernetes IO?
I'm trying to find it now, and
Yeah. It's in credentials, like node credentials, or pull secret credentials. I know because I had to review one of the sections for AWS.
So let's, since we're running out of time, let's follow up on Kubernetes Slack. And if we can't find any documentation, this might be it. We'll point you to the code and try to help you there. All right, well, we are out of time. Thank you so much for joining us today. See you guys in 2 weeks.
I found it. I'll post it in Slack.
Awesome, thank you.